In this lesson, we are going to learn how to use PowerPoint to create a pitch document. Okay, so now we are in PowerPoint, and as you can see, we have a blank document here, and this is what we are going to use to create our pitch document. So the first thing that we need to do is to use the background that we've already created. I'm not going to get a lot into PowerPoint because it's a very simple tool. It's very easy to use, and you're not going to use any fancy stuff or like spectacular transitions from one slide to another. You don't want to distract your audience from the content that you're showing them. So we're going to give you just a brief use of PowerPoint. So first of all, we have the here in this tab on the left, we have slides here. It's a blank slide, and we can basically copy it and paste it, and it will keep the format. But as you can see now, it's blank, so we need to add to the presentation the background in Photoshop. So we're going to delete this one, and we're going to right click, left click in Format Background, select Picture or Texture Fill, Picture from File. Now it's going to use some default texture, don't worry about that. And we're going to select the background that there you go. Now we have the background that we wanted. And we want to make sure that we apply that to all. Why? Because now, after applying that to all the slides in the presentation, we can copy it, and it's going to keep the same background that we created. Okay, so now we have this, and we're going to start writing text. So the easiest way would be, in fact, by clicking Insert and Text Box. So you may not see it, but it's creating I'm clicking and dragging, and it's going to create, now you can see it, a text box. And now, if I start writing, the text is barely visible because we are using a font that is in black, and we're going just to change its color by clicking this icon here, and we're going to make it white. Now it's visible. So we're going to define a couple concepts here in PowerPoint, this pitch document. We're going to define the concept of the game, I mean the idea behind the game. We're going to define the genre of the game. We're going to define the platform, where it's headed. We're going to define the style or the look of the game, and the target. And we're going to do each one in a different slide. So we're going to start doing this and relying heavily on images, because that's pretty much what a PowerPoint, what a pitch document is. We want to make sure that your audience gets a very clear visual look of what he's expecting. So let's start with we'll start with concept in the next lesson. So see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to define the features of our pitch document. Okay, so we have defined these 5 features that are going to be present on our pitch document. And we're going to start by the concept. So I'm just going to copy this slide, Control-C, and paste it, Control-V. And I'm going to work in this second slide. After that, we'll remove the first one. So I'm just going to work first into the concept. Sometimes it's complicated when you have to define the idea behind your game. That's what the concept is. So a trick that we use a lot because you don't want to get into long sentences explaining your idea. We use a trick a lot, which is basically taking two cultural references and combining them. In this case, we have a comic style game about a vampire that's trying to rescue his girlfriend, and it has a cartoon look. And if I think of cartoon and vampires, the first reference that comes into my mind is Hotel Transylvania. It's a movie by Genda Tartakovsky about a Dracula who has an hotel in Transylvania where all the monsters rest. So I'm going to use that as a reference, Hotel Transylvania. But that's only half of the equation, okay? Because we want to make sure that only with one sentence we define the whole game. And we're making a game, not a movie, so this game is going to be Hotel Transylvania meets Tiny Thief, which is a puzzle platformer game by Rovio, and it works in Android and iOS devices. So we're going to say that this is our game, Hotel Transylvania plus Tiny Thief. Okay, I'm just going to make this slightly bigger. You can see I'm clicking, I'm selecting, and I'm going to here to home, and I'm going just here to increase it to 28. Make sure it's readable. So now we have this slide, and now we have defined the concept, but it's pretty rough. So as I said, in a pitch document, you have to heavily rely on pictures. That's why I'm going to click Insert Pictures, and I'm going to select this picture here that I have of Hotel Transylvania. But as you can see, it's a pretty big image. Of course, you can click and left click and drag it anywhere you want. And now where you need to downscale this. So I'm just going to click here, left click here in the corner, and I'm going to make it smaller. Okay. And now that's half of the equation. We need to add a Tiny Thief image. Just in case, if somebody doesn't know what Tiny Thief or Hotel Transylvania is, they will have a pretty good look of what those concepts are. So as you can see here, I'm going to do something. Maybe you can see it in your screen. There's like a red guide that kind of shows that both images are the same size. So I'm going to make sure that both are fitting. Here, I'm going to make this slightly smaller, and we're going to basically have this here. There you go. You can also move by using the arrow keys when you select an image. So that's it. That's our concept. Of course, we had to add the concept title, so it would look something like this. But I'm not going to do this because I really want to do something with the fonts of our titles. So I'm not adding this. I'm just letting this the way it is. Okay, so that's our slide. I'm going to copy it, paste it, and I'm going to work on the copy. So the next one is the genre. Of course, the genre is pretty easy to define. It's a puzzle platformer, and we have some art that we can use to add to our pitch document. So we write puzzle platformer, and we insert picture, and we have this mocap here that kind of explains the kind of gameplay that we have. It's a pretty big, so we're going to downscale it again. And this is it. Pretty simple. That really defines that we're going to have a character that jumps in platforms and has abilities, and this control scheme here is going to define that it's going to be an iOS game. Of course, something that I always say, you don't need to know how to draw to make this. If you don't have the graphic resources to add to your PowerPoint presentation, you can always rely on references from the internet. You can grab two puzzle platformers and just explain your idea by that. Okay, so that's half of the document, and we'll continue with this in our next lesson. So see you next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to keep defining the features of our pitch document. Okay, so now we have the concept, we have the genre, and now we have to define the platform. So we're going to copy the slide, and we're going to keep working here. I'm going to erase this picture just by left-clicking it and pressing delete. And we know that our game is going to be released on mobile devices. So this is our main platform, mobile devices. I'm going to write this and devices, and I'm going to write iOS and Android. But let's imagine that we're thinking on, or considering that it will be interesting to release our game in a Steam, because Steam is a really huge platform for indie titles. So I'm going to add Steam here. What happens here is that we're going to have a primary target and a secondary target for our platform. So we have to put that in our document. So our primary platform is going to be mobile devices, and our secondary platform is going to be Steam. And again, in order to really make sure that this is not too much text for our presentation, we're going to make sure that it's clean and readable, because if we take a quick look, and sometimes a publisher just might take a quick look to what you're showing them, they may get confused with a lot of text. So what we're going to do is we're going to use something that is used a lot, not only in pitch documents, but also in game design documents, which is bullet points. Every time you are listing or enumerating things, you should probably use this, which is bullet points. You only have to select the text, and you press this, and it's going to create a bullet point. You can change the bullet point type, and you can have like different. As you can see, the shape is changing, but I always keep the black dots. And again, we have to rely on images. So what are we going to add here? Because I don't know, maybe we should add some images of iPhones or Samsung Android phones and a PC. What I do in this case is I just add the logos. Okay, so that way I'm going to select insert picture. I'm going to select this Android logo here, which as you can see is pretty big. I'm going to downscale it. I'm going to select this iOS logo here. I'm going to downscale it too. And then I'm going to select the Steam logo here. This Steam logo is a PNG. That means that it's transparent. So now what we really want to have is this two logos with transparency. We can remove that, but there's a pretty easy way to do that in PowerPoint. If we select our picture and we go to Format here, we select Color, and we set transparent color, and we click on the white color, it's going to remove the white and leave the green in this case. Okay, so I'm going to do the same with the iOS logo. I'm going to select it, I'm going to set transparent color, but see what happens. It has a color overlay, so this is not a perfect tool, and when you're trying to delete the color from a color overlay, kind of creates this dirty pixelated thing that it doesn't look any good. So I'm just going to, instead of trying to leave it the way it is, that will be an option. But now that we have all our logos with transparency, I'm just going to remove it and add a different one. It's pretty simple to look for a logo with transparency, and now you can see that here it is, the iOS logo. That really looks better. So now we have defined our three platforms, which is going to be iOS and Android as our first, or our primary devices, and we are considering a Steam version. Of course, if you if you want to make it more coherent, we can just move it this way. That's pretty much it. We're going to move to the visual look. So I'm going to copy this slide because it only has one image, sorry, and I'm going to remove. What do we know about our visual style? We know that it's going to have a cartoon look. So that's what I'm going to write. Basically, our visual style is going to have, our game is going to have a cartoon look. So I'm going to add a picture that kind of explains perfectly the kind of game we're kind of trying to achieve. And we have some cartoon characters here. Again, this is something that I just did by myself. I drew this. But again, if you don't know how to draw, you can rely on something that is suitable for your pitch document. In this case, if you want to have something like Hotel Transylvania, that will be perfect, like a 2D concept of Hotel Transylvania, or any cartoon that kind of really reflects your idea of the game. We have this slide because you may want to have a comic game about vampires, but not with a cartoon look. In this case, we want this. So you have to explain the look of your game. So this is what we are going to add. And our last slide is going to be our target. So I'm going to copy this one, and I'm going to delete this. And we are going to define the audience. I mean, our game is targeted to an audience, and which is going to be that audience. So in this case, being an iOS, mainly an iOS and an Android game, our audience is going to be around 15 to 25. Always keep like a 5-year, 10-year range when you're defining targets. Unless you're working with in a game for kids, I mean, there's a huge difference between what a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old can do. There's a huge gap between those two ages. But if you're trying to establish a difference between 25 or 23, there's almost no difference. They're kind of work the same. So I'm just going to say that our game is oriented to adults from 20 to 30 probably. But let's say that we want to make sure that we are trying to rely on nostalgia about adventure games. Probably that will be interesting, and we want to explain that we are also aiming for people that enjoyed adventure games from the 90s era. So that is a secondary target. So we're going to say players that enjoyed adventure games, and we're going to define a broader age. So we're going to say 30, 40, oops, sorry, year players that enjoy adventure games. So that's going to be our primary target, and this is going to be our secondary target. Of course, we can make this shorter. So we can say 30, 40 year adventure game lovers. And again, we are enumerating things, so we are going to select this and use a bullet point to make sure that that it kind of looks clean. So now we are going to we have to add something that really defines what we are aiming, what our main audience is going to be. And instead of adding pictures of people, which is something that I've seen in some pitch documents and it doesn't make any sense, we're going to select images that kind of rely on what we are looking for. I mean, games that represent our target. So, of course, we are talking about puzzle platformers, and we're going to add a picture of one of the most famous puzzle platformers, which is Limbo. And Limbo is a pretty good reference because it's not exactly a teenager game. And we can, of course, use an image of an adventure game, but sometimes talking about games that are not popular anymore is kind of risky. So you want to make sure that you always grab successes when you're, I mean, really big hits when you're explaining your idea. So Limbo is a good example. And instead of adding some Monkey Island or Day of the Tentacle or Sierra game screenshot, we're going to add a different puzzle game, which is going to be probably we have two options here: Beat Sneak Bandit, which is pretty popular. We're going to select Braid, and we're going to do the same. We're going to make sure that both images fit, because having a structured document is pretty good. And we're going to make sure it's centered, and that's it. So that's okay. Now we can at least get rid of this slide, which was our guide. And now we have the concept here, How to Transylvania plus Tiny Thief. We have genre here, it's going to be a puzzle platformer. We have our platforms here, it's going to be for mobile devices and probably to Steam. And we have defined our visual style here, it's going to have a cartoon look. And of course, the target of our game. So now we have defined all those 5 features. We're almost done. We only have to give it a finishing touch with the titles and a cover, and we'll see that on the next lesson. So, see you next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to give the finishing touches to our pitch document by creating titles and a cover. Okay, so we're back in Photoshop, and I wanted to show you this because we're going to create the titles here. Why? And why here and why not in PowerPoint? Because we have a text tool also in PowerPoint. The first reason is because we have a lot of effects there, and some of those effects are not going to translate pretty well to PowerPoint. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to save this title, every title, to a PNG with transparency, and that way I'm going to make sure that it really looks the way I intended. So first of all, I'm just going to change the name because it's not going to have any setting here. We only have concept, genre, platform, visual, and target. And I'm going to write the longest title, which is going to be platform. What I'm going to do now is I want to make sure that now it has a white font, and it has a red outline around it and some sort of grading overlay, but it's not too vampirish. So I want to make something that really draws the attention of our audience. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click here, and I'm going to change the color to a bright red. And but as you can see, it kind of leaves this white red transition that it doesn't look pretty good. So this is because the gradient overlay is set to normal. So it's a white to black overlay. What we are going to do is we're going to change the blend mode from normal to multiply. And now we have this bright red color that we really want. Maybe we can make it slightly darker by increasing raising the opacity. So now we have the platform, and it looks pretty good. But now we have to save each file into a PNG. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to hide what's below the title, and you can do it by left-clicking in this eye icon here, or you can do it by left-clicking and dragging. It will hide everything. Now we're going to select the marquee tool, or by pressing M, or selecting this icon here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to crop the image. So now we have it cropped. And I want to save this, into each title into a different file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go File, Save As, and I'm going to save it as a PNG with transparency. And I'm going to name it title underscore platform. I'm using the longest word because I want to make sure that there's enough space to fit all the titles that we have. Now that we have here, we have platform, which is the longest, we can write concept and again save it, and or the shortcut for save as is Ctrl+Shift+S and save it into a PNG, title concept, and genre. Save it as PNG here. We have visuals, so save it again, PNG, title underscore visual, and the last will be target. Okay, so now we have our 5 titles, and we can add those by as if they were pictures. So now we want to go back to the way we had the PSD. So we can of course close this and don't save, and it will respect the way the PSD was. But an easy way to do that will be by pressing Ctrl+Alt+C, and by multiple times is going to go back to the way we had it. So now what we want is to create a cover, and to do this I'm going to just hide this, probably hide this, and just left this. Probably I'm going to left the text here, and I'm just going to add it here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add again a drawing, something that attracts you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this image that I had. So there's something with a color profile. Don't worry about that. Just press OK. And this image, I use this image for my presentation, but don't worry about that. There's pretty common to repeat things. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab this image and add it to my PSD in order to create a cover. So again, I'm just dragging it here, the same color mismatch. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make it slightly smaller. By pressing Ctrl+Subtract, you can zoom out and make sure that you grab it, and can press Ctrl+T in order to transform it. And okay, now we have our image here. And what we are going to do is we're going to change the blend mode. So something that I did in previous lessons, you just only have to left click here, and by selecting normal and pressing left and right, this is something that you do a lot, you will be changing the blend mode. Because sometimes you don't know exactly what kind of blending mode you want to use. This is pretty interesting. It kind of looks good. So we're going to just move this, the text layer up. So we're clicking select it and move it over, because we don't want any F2 overlay over the text. And now we just only have to create, to give it a name of a game. It doesn't matter if it's just a placeholder. It's something that you do because when you're showing your concept or your idea to somebody, it's good to have a name for that instead of calling random vampire game. Okay, so we're going to call it a vampire in law, for example. It's not a pretty good name. We're going to select the text, going to center it, and probably we just wanted to select a different font for this. So what I'm going to do is we select that font that we didn't use for our presentation, but it was like a really Gothic style. I think its name was Gothic something, Gothic Steel. If it's the way it looks, probably this is the one. So okay, as you can see, now we are only using capital letters. It kind of looks It doesn't look any good, so I'm going to just change it. I'm not pretty convinced about this. So this is something that you kind of test or try a couple times, and if you're not convinced about anything, it will be just something that you try. You try with different fonts, different free fonts, until you find something that really suits you. So let's imagine that we're probably changing this for the next lesson, but it's a simple thing. You only have to left click here and you will change the font here until you find something that really fits you. This is not going to be our final font, but just to make sure, we're going to scale this a little bit, and we're going to just make sure that we make this by selecting here. This is going to change the space between lines. So, whoops, this is too much. This will be probably better. Now we have something that really looks good. I'm probably going to change the color, because for this, now it kind of looks better, and I'm probably going to remove the gradient overlay. So now it's not probably the best cover ever, but it's going to do the trick. Probably will change it a little bit after this. But again, I'm just going to save it, Control-Shift-S, and I'm going to save it as a PNG, because we're going to use this as a background, and we're going to name it cover. And that's it. Okay, we have a cover and we have titles, and we'll show you how our presentation looks in our next lesson. So see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to finish our pitch document by adding the assets that we created in Photoshop. Okay, so now we have we're back in PowerPoint with our 5 slides, and we're going to create a copy, this one, the first one, and we're going to use it as a cover. So I'm going to delete this text, and I'm going to change the format background, and to insert from file, I'm going to select this cover. As you can see, I've changed a little bit, and I had a font that is slightly more vampirish, and I'm using this as a cover. Now what you can see here is we have our cover, we have our different slides here, and now we only have to, I'm just going to remove this, and we're going to place our titles. So we're going to click Insert, Pictures. Remember that we're using those titles as images. So concept here, we have it here. We're going to place it in the left corner. We're going to downscale it a little bit because it's pretty big, and probably we're going to move it here. Now it really looks good. I mean, this image really looks interesting, and we're going to basically repeat the same. We may have to downscale a little bit our pictures or move text, but don't worry, that will be pretty easy to do. So now we're adding genre again, and we move here a little bit here. And we'll basically do this in all our presentation, and after that we'll take a look to our finished presentation. Okay, so we'll see that on our next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to review our finished pitch document. So here it is. This is our finished pitch document. As you can see, I've changed the cover a little bit more. This is the presentation mode in PowerPoint. You can just activated by pressing F5. And basically, I've added a logo. I've changed the logo a little bit to give it a slightly vampirish look again. And we've added the platformer, which is going to be our genre, and to the platforms here, just to make sure that even in the first image, that if our publisher or our audience, if they only get to see the first slide of our presentation, they are going to know what the game is about. So we have cartoon here, we have vampires, we have puzzle platformer, and we have iOS. It's like synthesizing the whole pitch document into one slide. That should be our cover. Of course, this is what we have here. The concept, Hotel Transylvania plus Tiny Thief. The genre, it's going to be a puzzle platformer. The platform, which is going to be our primary platform, is going to be mobile devices, and our secondary platform is going to be Steam. And look, which is going to be the cartoon look. And this is the same illustration that we have on our cover, but here we have in full color, so it's going to have a different impact. And of course, the target of our game, adults from 20 to 30 and 30-40-year adventure game lovers. So that's pretty much it. Now we have a pitch document that we have a presentation, and we can show to anybody, to the team, to the marketing department, to a publisher. That will be the first step. But what happens if we want to get slightly deeper into game design? We have to delve with game design documents, and we'll see that on our next lesson. So see you next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to delve into the game design document, which is the #1 tool for game designers. Okay, so we have seen how to create a pitch document, which is useful for marketing purposes and to really really quickly explain your idea to the team, or maybe to explain your idea to a publisher. That's useful, but you can't rely on a pitch document in order to get into development. If you get into development, you need something which is deeper than the pitch document. That would be the game design document. Design document is useful for the design team, mostly to have a coherent and updated design. When you're working on a game, you're constantly changing things, and you have to really make sure that those changes that you do are registered in some place, and that's the perfect place to do it, the game design document. And you have to keep it always up to date, because you don't know if somebody's going to read it and have a different version, and they won't be able to work with it. It's pretty useful for the programming team, basically because they're going to build a game relying on that document. That's the foundation of a game. It's also useful for the art team. It doesn't matter if it's 2D or 3D, and for the animation team, because they're going to use it to define the visual look of the game and to create an asset list. If you're listing the number of animations that you need, the number of items that you need, the number of weapons, whatever, this is something that they're going to grab and use it as a reference. It's also very useful for the audio and music team, because in the same way that the art department grabs and creates an asset document, the audio team is going to create a track list and sound effects needed to create audio and music for the game. And of course, it's pretty useful for production in order to really schedule and keep it in mind if it's under budget, and if we have to cut features to reach the budget, and of course to plan the milestones and development plans. And of course, QA has to have a testing plan, and they always start from the game design document. There are two different stages when you're creating a game design document. The first one is the high game design document, and the second is the low game design document. The difference between those two is that The high-level game design document is generally, it has a brief description of the game's features. It's only 3 or 6 pages long. Um, Basically, it's a document that adapts to the needs of the game, and it's divided in different sections. You have like the game concept. Probably there you'll have much of the information that you already have on the pitch document. You're going to explain about the idea of the game, the concept of the game, the setting of the game, the visual style, but just a brief about what the game is. And then you're going to define the three C's: the camera, character, and control. Those three C's are probably the most important features to describe in a document. How is your character going to move? How is going to look? How is going to behave? How the camera is going to look and behave to, and how the control scheme is going to be. Those three things are really going to define your game and are pretty important. And of course, you might want to go into defining enemies. If you might not have enemies in your game, but you might have. You have to define the audio slightly a little bit. It's going to have this particular kind of music or particular kind of audio or effects or whatever. If your game has it, you also have to define items and power-ups, animations. But mostly, the most important thing of a high-level design document, and we call it high-level because we are just. I always have the same example for this. If you are a bird and you're looking to the ground and you're flying high, you just have a broad vision of what's in the ground. But if you're flying low, you have a detailed vision of what's on the ground. So that's the main difference between high-level design and low-level design. So low-level design is a more detailed description of the game's feature. Generally, you have different documents, independent documents, depending on the high-level game design document. I mean, if you really need to explain on detail your camera, let's imagine a game like God of War, which has a really complex camera on rails, but it has different situations, and you really have to describe how the camera behaves in those different situations. You may want to have a document where the camera is described. So you have a camera document, AI document, or an items document, or there are thousands of different documents, and generally those documents are related or linked. It's really important when you're writing a GDD. That's the short for game design document, to make it easy to read, and to make it the way to make it easy to read is to make it shorter. A short game document is easy to read and is easy to write too, and because you don't want the team to spend too many time reading your thoughts about game design or your ideas about anything. You just wanted to have a really quick look of the whole concept. And of course, a short game document is also easier to update. If you have like a 100-page document, you're going to go reviewing the whole document, which is going to be really painful. But if you have a 5-page document, it's going to be easy to update. And of course, and this is something that happens a lot, you might be working with a publisher maybe from Asia, maybe from part of Europe, and you may want to have it translated to somebody. So if you have to translate it, it's easier and cheaper to translate a short long document. And of course, and this is something, it kind of translates from the pitch document, but you have to rely on pictures. That doesn't mean that, of course, it's a document, so it's going to have a lot of text, but you have to rely on pictures because an image is worth a thousand words. So it's really useful to illustrate your ideas with images from other games. If you have artists creating mockups or an art for you, that's okay. And it will show the programmers and the different departments how it's going to look in the game. But if you don't have that, it's really okay. It's something that a lot of people do. You can just grab references to explain, oh, look, the camera is going to look like in this other game. And of course, it's important to have it structured, to have a clean document, and to have it really well structured. Generally, game design documents are written from the player's POV. So you always have to begin sentences with the player. So the player reaches a new level after gaining enough XP points. When that happens, the player hears a sound effect, and the player receives 3 attribute points to spend in its skills. So that should be the way you should explain like a level up. Okay, so that's the way to do it. It's pretty important to have a clean format in a game design. Don't bother to use many fonts. One or two, and probably just one will be enough. You just want it to be, you don't want it to be fancy. You want to be readable, easily readable. Of course, bullet points, and you can see in this, even in this presentation, that I'm constantly using bullet points. And of course, you cannot try to explain your ideas like if you're writing a novel. You have to use headers and titles, and split every chunk of information um, into different sections, just to make sure that it's easier to read and it has a professional look. And this is something that, although it might seem obvious, it kind of happens. You have to avoid repeating ideas. You don't want to explain something like 3 or 4 times, and sometimes it's complicated because if you're writing a long document, you might be repeating ideas. But you have to avoid it. And of course, avoid jokes. It's something that's pretty obvious too, but it also happens a lot. So please don't add any jokes or any humorous comments in your documents. And sometimes, and this is something that happens a lot, when you're writing something, you kind of get stuck and then move to a different section of the document. And sometimes you just leave a placeholder. You just write, okay, I'm going to write here, blah 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 blah, and you just you just type that in the document. If you do that, you have to double check the document and make sure that if that is sent to your publisher or to your team, that that placeholder is erased. Otherwise, you will look really silly by doing that. And of course, you have to check typos and spelling errors. There's nothing that looks more unprofessional than a document that's full of spelling errors. So, the way to create a GDD, the only way, well, it's not the only way, but one of the most popular ways to create GDDs is by using Microsoft Word. And we'll see that on our next lesson. So, see you on our next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to start using Microsoft Word to create a game design document. Okay, so now we are at Microsoft Word, which is probably the most popular word processor. And that's the reason why almost all game design documents are written in Microsoft Word. I know it's not a fancy program, it doesn't look like anything attractive, but the truth behind the game design work, it's here. I mean, that's the number one tool that you use. It's not any software editor or something like that. You're going to spend most of your time just writing your ideas here. So what we are going to do is we're going to start by defining by just grabbing all the ideas all the features that we explain in the document and translating those features here. So first of all, we have a title, which is A Vampire in Love, which is not exactly the best name, but it will do the trick as a working title. Um, then we have the genre. It's going to be a puzzle platformer. The platform is going to be mobile devices, iOS, Android, and PC, Steam. And we're going to define the target, which is 20, 30-year-old gamers and 35 40-year-old adventure game lovers. Okay, um, that's like that's basically writing. Okay. The problem with that is that the way it is displayed, uh, it's the less interesting thing ever. If I have to read this, I will get bored as soon as possible. As soon as I start reading it. That's why you have to use titles, or you have to use bold characters, and so I'll show you. I'm just going to select this. I'm going to make it bold, and I'm going to make it slightly bigger. And I can do the same here. I mean, I'm doing it slightly bigger, and just bolding the letter. But there's an easy way to do that. If you like the style of something, you only have to select all the text or just a part of it and click the Format Painter. Format Painter is really useful because it's going to copy the style of a text to another text. So if you click it and then select a different text, as you can see, is the font size and it bolds it. And if you select it and double click it, the Format Painter is going to keep selected, so it's going to change every text that you select. So this is something that it's going to save you a lot of time when you're editing text in Word. So, and again, what I'm going to say is I'm listing things, so the same here, the same work that works in PowerPoint is going to work here. We need to have bullet points for this. So this is it. We're going to select the text, and we're going to just make sure that this is something easier to read. Okay, so that will be our starting point. But after that, as I said, we have to start defining many features about our game, and that's where the document editing gets really interesting. So we'll get into that in the next lesson. So see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to continue working on our high-level game design document. So we have defined these 4 features, but we didn't get into the concept yet. The reason why is because the main difference between game design document and a pitch document is that now you must use words to really define what you're trying to do. So let me show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to, and this is probably the easiest way to work. Instead of you know, just writing the text again, I'm going to write game concept and just changing its size and its font and whatever. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy it, and after that paste it. So that way I only have to change this concept. And what are we going to do here? Let me just get rid of this bullet points. What we're going to do is we're going to really define our game, but instead of just using a sentence, what we're going to do is we're going to really detail it. I mean, we're going to try to sell our concept. We're going to, if you think about the back cover of a game, where they're always using this marketing language about how you will experience an incredible game with lots of thrilling features. That sort of language is what you are expecting to write in here. You have to convey the idea that's behind your game, and then kind of explain it here. But you also have to keep in mind that this is a document, so a document that's going to be focused to development. So although you may want to keep that marketing style, you also have to touch some details of the game. So I'm just going to make sure every time, and that's something that I do a lot when I'm using using a placeholder, and I'm writing this just to make sure that when I go back to the document, I'm going to edit it. I just change the color. In order to change the color, the easiest way will be to select all the text and then click here, and you can change the font color to wherever you want. This red is probably the best option because it's going to be pretty visible. So you'll make sure that you get that in as you reach this part. So again, now we have to define something that is called a key feature or a USP. USP means unique selling points. Unique selling point is it's just the reason why a user is going to buy the game or is going to play it, and so that's what you should really write. Okay, so just let me grab this here, and what I'm going to do is you have to write the reasons why someone or somebody is going to buy / play your game. And that kind of depends on how well you delve with words, but it's pretty important stuff that you keep in mind, that you have to be good with words and communicate your ideas when you're a game designer. Because game design is not just using an editor or just thinking about game concepts. It's just explaining that concept to a wider audience. And after that, we should probably get into one of the 3 C's. I mean, if you remember when I was speaking about game design documentation, I was talking about the 3 big C's: the camera, control, and character. So but before that, let me show you something. Let's say that I have filled this whole page here, probably. And just let me do it. Okay, so I'm going to copy this, and let's imagine that we are writing some paragraph here, and in this game, blah blah blah. Okay, and this is something that it really marks the difference between a professional document or an amateur document. So we're going to grab this here. I'm going to just paste it to make it look like if it is a paragraph. Let's imagine that we have this title here, and we want to make sure, of course, because this document has to look like if it's a book or a brochure, you never see this. You will never see that the title is in one page and the text is in a different page. And this is something that it might sound like pretty obvious, but sometimes when you're editing when you have edited a lot of times your document, things keep changing and changing the scale and the size, and you're going to have a problem with that. So if you wanna move this down, okay, don't do this. Do not press enter until you move it here. Why? Because there will be a gap here. You can see this lines. If you move this, you erase this, what will happen is that we have that blank space, and we don't want that. If we want this to stay in this next door, we have to break the page, and you can do it here, insert, page break, and now, although we change this, although we erase this, we can erase whatever we want, and we make this paragraph stays in the second page. I'll show you some examples of this. So let's say that we want to have this in our next page. So we're going to define the character. character. So we're going to define the look of the character, how he or she behaves, and if it has any special abilities or powers or whatever. Just a brief explanation. You don't have to get a lot into that. I'll show you some of that after that. After that, we'll define the game's control. Oops, sorry, just let me copy it. Now we have control here. And the easiest way to describe this will be using if we are making a game for console or a PC, it will be easier to have just a control scheme. Just to grab an image of maybe a PS3 controller, an Xbox controller, or a PC keyboard and mouse, and just easily have an image edited to just show what happens if you press different keys. And of course, you'll have your and the easiest way to do this it will be just by using mockup. It could be a mockup with just squares and circles. It doesn't matter, as long as you make sure that your artist gets a really clean view, a really definite look of how the game is going to look on the screen. It doesn't matter if it's the screen of your computer, if it's the screen of your TV, or if it's the screen of your mobile phone. You need to make sure that your artist, the art team, knows how it's going to look. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to basically write some text here, and I'll show you in the next lesson how to change the look of the document to make it look better. Okay, so see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to continue editing our high-level game design document. Okay, so as you can see here, I've detailed a couple of ideas in my game concept paragraph. I've written a couple paragraphs, and I'm defining who the player controls, which is a Drago, who is a kind-hearted vampire who has to rescue Cordelia, his girlfriend, before she gets burned at the stake by a fanatic vampire hunter, or killed by the minions of his mother, a vampire. He will have to fight his way through forests, catacombs, vampire lakes, whatever. And I'm also pointing that he has to use his wit and logic to combine it with his vampire abilities to survive. And he can mesmerize humans, turn into a bat or mist to avoid stakes, sunlight, and holy water to rescue his girlfriend. And I'm finishing with this: help Drago until it's too late. This is something that is used a lot, that kind of ending sentence that kind of looks like a marketing quote. So what I'm doing here is I'm basically briefly talking about characters, main characters of the game. I'm talking a little bit here about locations in the game, about the abilities of the character, and I'm talking about traps and menaces that will be present in the game. So we're just presenting what's going to be on the game, but just in a couple of paragraphs. On key features, this kind of changes a lot depending on if you're looking for a publisher or you're just making the game and you're going to make it no matter if you have support or not. So if you're making the game, this key features are not as important as if you're looking for funding. So if you're looking for funding, you should probably develop this a little bit more. I mean, you have to say we have a humorous cartoon setting which is pretty innovative in this kind of games, and it's going to be puzzle platformer, which means that it's going to be embraced before brown, blah blah blah. It's going to have a huge IP potential because it has many charismatic characters and all that stuff. That's focused to sell your idea, and that's why USP is important depending on what your goal is. If you're trying to sell, that's pretty important. If you're not, you should probably skip this step. You're just making the game because you want to make it. And after that, I'm talking about the character here. Who is Drago, kind-hearted vampire, distinctive red hair and goatee, and whatever. I'm describing the character, but we can say the same that we said on our pitch document, that an image is worth 1,000 words. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an image to this paragraph, and I'm going to show you how. But first of all, here is the control paragraph, and as you can see, the title is in one page and the text is in the next. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a page break, or I can press Control Enter just to move that to the next page, and we make sure that this is going to stay in the next page. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add insert a picture, and I'm going to picture that we had of our character. Again, as I told you, you can have images, or you can have reference images. If you don't have an artist to create that, you can just do it, grab an image that will suit your idea of your character. So what happens now is that, as you can see, that the text, well, first of all, the image is too big and it has moved the text below. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that the position of our text, I'm going to select it, I'm going to make it square. That way we can move the image wherever we want it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to downscale it, and you can do it the same way you do it in PowerPoint, just by clicking in one corner and dragging. And I'm going to move it here. So you can do something like that. Even it will look great. You know, now we have the whole text here, and we have an image by its side that really reflects what we were talking about. Of course, we can just downsize it a little bit just to make sure that all the text of our character that we have here is going to fit in. And that's a pretty good thing. If you can see those green guidelines, that will really help you to make sure that it has the same size and really fits the document. So as you can see, we can leave it here, we can leave it this way, but the problem is that we are going to this two lines is going to the next page, which is not going to look any good. So what I'm going to do, we have two solutions for this. We can either downscale it more, which won't be a problem if we leave it this way. We have the picture here, but it will help. It will pretty small. We can move it to the right probably, but we're not going to respect these spaces at the side of the page. So what I'm going to do is something that I do a lot. It's basically I'm going to text to make sure that this present by just removing words, unnecessary words. Like if you're writing a tweet, you have to make sure that it fits specific characters. So that's something that you have to do also when you're writing a document and you want to make sure that it fits the space. So I'm going to do that. Afterwards, I'm just going to move here, control, and what I'm going to do is I have defined how the character is going to move to the left by pressing left on our virtual pad, move to the right by pressing the right on our virtual pad. But of course, we have an image that we already use, and it's pretty common to use it again. So I'm going to select it, and I'm going to wrap the text to square to make sure that it fits. And maybe I can make it slightly smaller, something like even more like that. As you can see, the text is now moving, so I kind of, that will be okay. So now we have a control scheme and and images that are going to define text, sorry, what that's going to define what's going on in the screen. So we know that this is the virtual path, that is the button one, and this is button two. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about abilities and stuff. That's the way you insert images on documents, and that's the way you kind of edit your document. So as you can see, and let me go a little bit back. Now it's looking better than what we started. We have bolding titles, we have images, and that kind of it's looking better. And we'll keep working on it on our next lesson. So see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to keep working on the game design document. Okay, so we have a document with a couple of pictures, which is interesting, but maybe we can do it better. We can improve it, and we can keep working adding features. So as you can see, I've done something with the control and camera, because due to the fact that we have really shows how the game is going to look, um, I have I've merged the two sections. So that way, I'm explaining that a Vampire in Love is going to be a 2D platformer with a lateral view and parallax scroll. Um, and I'm using this because you can obviously see that in that screenshot. And after that, I say that the player will control drag or using a virtual pad in mobile devices or the keyboard in PC. And after that, I'm explaining basically the set of controls that you have with this scheme. After that, I've added a couple of different sections, which is going to be the special abilities. That, of course, would change depending on the game. I mean, in this case, we don't have weapons, for example, or items, but we do have special abilities because, as we have said, our character turns into a bat, he can turn into mist, and he can mesmerize enemies. That is something that that will change, definitely change if we were making a shooter in which you grab different guns, something like that. After that, I'm going to briefly define the visual style. Again, even if we have already said that this is going to be a cartoon game and it's going to be a cartoon look, we really want to make sure to provide references of just to show how our game is going to look. And of course, we have enemies. That's something that we're going to describe. And after that, we're going to explain the head-up display of the game. The head-up display, or HUD, or it's basically all the information of the health bars and energy bars and meters that we have in any game. And with that, we will finish the document. We're going to add some references as benchmark, which might be either an influence to our game or a competitor of our game. So I'm going to define that, and after I have all the text, I'll come back and I'll start adding features and adding the finishing touches to our high-level game design document. So see you next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to give our document the last finishing touches. Okay, so as you can see, I've filled the document. I've written the special abilities here, the interaction or feeding that Drago can do in our game. About transformation, and I've added this picture that we had, which kind of explains how the transformation works by pressing jump and up at the same time, and they will turn into a bat. And here's the mesmerizing thing, the mesmerizing power. You have like a visual reference for everything, and as you can see, the format is pretty screwed. So I'm going to fix that now. In the visual style, I've added this picture, and I'm defining again the color style. I'm giving a couple of references that would really suit the style of our game, like Dracula, Vampire Story, which is a video game, or movies like Once Bitten or Lover First Bite. Something that will really define the kind of comedy and humorous tone to the vampires. Concerning enemies, I've described only two. There'll probably be more, and in this case, usually just give a slight reference to each enemy. But I'm just going to use this two just to show you the formatting thing. I'm also talking about the head-up display. I'm talking about the red bar and the blue bar that is present here, and you can see that in this image. I'm going to show you how to add this. And of course, I've added the references or benchmark, and I've added three games that we have been talking about a lot in the previous pitch document, which were Limbo, Braid, and this is the Miss PB Winterbottom, which is also, of course, a puzzle platformer. Okay, so first of all, what I'm going to do is I need to make a difference between this, because now the format is pretty screwed. We have the image in a different page. So I'm just going to make sure that this really stands out. So I'm going to bold it, and then I'm going to make it italic. And this will be italic here. This won't be the only thing that we are going to do. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this. In order to move this, remember that you have to wrap text and turn it to square. So now it's going to move almost whatever he wants. And what we are going to do is we're going to move it down here. So as you can see, we have a problem here, which is either if we wanted to have this image centered, the only way to do this is by we are going to have to split the text. So probably again, the easiest way to do that will be downsizing it. Downsizing it a little bit, not too much, just to make sure that the text is visible. And here you can see, by pressing up and down at the same time, we can obviously make it slightly smaller. And then we have the mesmerizing part of ability here, and we're going to do the same, bolded and italic. And we have those interactions. But even with that, we want to keep the bullet points. So I'm going to select each one of them, and I'm going to use bullet points to define it. As you can see now, this text has moved, so I'm going to put it back again to where it belongs here. Sometimes it's kind of complicated. Okay, I'm going to move this slightly down, or I'll probably increase the size of it. Even though if it's a space, it will be okay. And we're going to do the same thing with the enemies. I'm going to bold and italic, and I'm going to give it a bullet point, and the same thing with this, italic, bold, bullet point. So concerning the reference, the head-up display, we have it here on this image. We have these two bars here, and this is what we really want to show. So we can go to Photoshop and we can edit this image, and then just crop this part of the image and then save it and add this picture. But we can do something simpler. We can copy this image and go to the display part and paste it. And what we are going to do is we're going to select it and click format, and we're going to crop it. Okay, so now I can crop this image to where I really want it. This is pretty simple. You can only have to left click and drag. That way, and by remember wrapping text in square, I don't know where where to go. You will be able to have this and to really make sure that this really fits it. Oh, now I have the. Let me just downsize it a little bit because it's going to be pretty visible. And now the only thing that we need is we're going to move the references back to the next, forward to the next page. And remember, to do that, we have to insert a page break or just press Ctrl Enter. So now we can probably move this a little bit here to make sure that all images are in line. Here you will have some guides that will help you do this. Oops, sorry. So now I'm going to press Ctrl and the mouse wheel back, and we're going to see how the document looks, and I think it looks pretty good. If you really want to design something else and really make sure that something it's out of the layout that you're thinking, that'll be okay. But that will probably be a decent high-level design document. We're almost done here. The only thing that I also something that I don't like about it happens with when I have an image and I have a white background, is that I always like, and this is something that I just do because I like, I always tend to add a border to the image. So I'm going to click this image, picture border, and I'm going to select this gray color. So as you can see, kind of gives it a little bit of, kind of stands out, so it's pretty visible. And the good thing about that is that I can click here, I can click an image to go to, I can go to select the format painter, and I can go to almost all the images in the document. And as you can see, it's going to create some problems here, but we'll fix it. And make sure that all images in our document they have this really nice border. So again, we are going to move this because it kind of adds a little bit here. Here it is. And again, this one is moving. We have to move it back here. And here will be in line. And that's pretty much it. We have a 4-page document. We only need to add a background to it. So what we're going to do, I'm going to show you it's going to be just the finishing touch for this. I'm going to add the background in our next see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to give the finishing touch to our document by adding a background. Okay, so we're almost done here in terms of content. I mean, we have already defined the 3 themes. We have defined the special abilities. We have a pretty decent amount of images defined in the game that we want. And that's pretty much all for a high-level game design document. If we wanted to have to keep developing this game, we would probably get into different low-level design documents like an AI document or a control document or camera document. But as far as we're concerned in terms of high-level design, this is a pretty decent. It's a 4-page document, and it will do the trick. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a background to this document. A white background is perfectly okay. Most documents in the industry, they have white backgrounds, and there's not a problem with that. But I like my document to really stand out and to reinforce the whole theme of the game. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Insert header, and I'm going to edit header. And as you can see, we are now in the header. We cannot edit this text here. The only text that we can add is here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert picture, and I'm going to this one that I created. And as you can see, it's quite big for a header, but that is because I'm not going to use it as a header. I'm going to select it, wrap text, and behind text. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move it here and scale it to make sure. Whoops, sorry, I think I have scaled it too much. I'm going to downscale a little bit again here. And I just want to make sure that this image is visible in the whole document. So I'm going to move it here, slightly here, that will be okay. And I'm going to select here design, close, header, and footer. And now you can see how it looks. It has with a very low opacity, it has a background that really reinforces that setting that we are controlling a vampire. And even if it's that image that we have used for a visual style, it's quite different because we don't perceive it the same way. So basically, that's what we have. We have a 4-page document that really looks good, and we're almost ready to go. That's all of our lessons. So I hope you enjoyed my lessons, and see you on next lessons. Bye. Hi everyone, my name is Alfredo González Barros. I'm a game designer and a game design instructor with more than 8 years of experience. Some of my projects include Kick-Ass 2 the game and Young Justice Legacy for Xbox 360, PS3 and PC. In this course, we are going to learn essential skills to become a game designer, as well as learning tips and tricks used in the game industry to successfully create game design documentation. Some of the key takeaways from watching this course include learning how to come up with an interesting game concept and how to effectively communicate that game concept to a wider audience or a publisher. We will learn how to create professional game design documentation in Microsoft PowerPoint and Microsoft Word, as well as defining a visual look and aesthetics for our game design. By the end of the training, you will have learned how to create and present game design documentation that might be useful to pitch your ideas or to keep your game design always up to date. I'm excited to work with digital tutors and share these techniques with fellow game designers. So, let's get started with the first lesson. In this lesson, we will define the role of the game designer as well as exploring different types of designers depending on their tasks. One of the first things that I really like to explain when I'm talking about game design is what game design is. Because a lot of people, even people involved in game development, they don't get what the role of a game designer is. I like to explain that by telling what a game design is not. Game design is not creating game art, is not programming, is not testing the game, and is not writing the game script. Although sometimes, especially if you're working in the independent industry, you will be creating game art, you will be programming, you will be testing the game, and you will be writing the game script. The definition of game design is elaborating rules and mechanics to facilitate interaction between players. But even that definition is hard to understand, especially for non-gamers. And game design, it's even a broader term in the games industry, and it changes a lot depending on the duties and tasks assigned to each designer. That's why I like to use kids' games to give an example of what a game designer or level designer does in his daily tasks. That's why I say there's a cops and rubber designer, a building blocks designer, and a chills role play make-believe designer. Cops and robbers, well, obviously we all know what cops and robbers is, but basically when you're playing cops and robbers, someone has to define where's the safe zone. or which are going to be the rules of the game. Is there going to be a chain tag? I mean, if I grab somebody, I have to carry him with me. Can it be a jailbreak? I mean, if someone is made prisoner, can a robber go and liberate his teammates by tagging them? Those are basically game rules, game mechanics, and victory and defeat conditions. And that's the role of a game designer. That's something that Will Wright, he's the creator of SimCity, The Sims, and Spore, is specialized on. Basically creating game rules and game mechanics. There's another type of designer. Designer that's interested in the child's role play or make-believe. When you're playing a role play, you kind of change the rules and establish everything as you want. Like now we're pirates and we're on a ship and we're assaulting a town or whatever. And sometimes kids just goes to a bench in the park and says, "Okay, so now this is our spaceship and we're astronauts and we'll be conquering the moon," or whatever. And you kind of suddenly change the rules as you go by. It's like, oh, what if now the Martians come and we have to fight against them and everything. That's creating concepts, creating genres of games, and defining a setting and a certain aesthetic. And that's the job of creative director. That's what Hideo Kojima, he's the creator of Metal Gear Solid, that's what he does. The last type of designer is the building blocks designer. It's just basically you're grabbing the blocks and creating structures, and you're defining what a structure is and defining how it has to integrate with the rest of blocks. And you kind of say, okay, now let's put a bridge here, and this is going to be the police station, and you're kind of building your own city. And that's basically what a building blocks is. That's creating scenario elements, a level layout, game situations, and level mechanics. And that's the job of a level designer. Tom Hall is very famous for creating the level design for Wolfenstein 3D and Doom while he was working at ID Software. The progression inside the game industry generally, it doesn't mean that it has to be this way always. Generally, people start as level designers, and then if they're interested in a slightly more creative role, they kind of move into game designer and they start designing mechanics and rules of play. And after that, if they're really good and they're really hardworking and they kind of understand the global look on the global look of the game, they will move to become creative directors. Anyway, there's a lot of industry specialization. So there's an AI designers, sorry, audio designers, combat designers, narrative designers. No designer is able to do all the design of a game. They're like teams of 20, 25 people, 30 people, and every part of the design is kind of divided into different chunks, and every designer kind of takes responsibility on one of those chunks. So in our next lesson, we'll start as if it were creative directors, and we will start thinking about game concept and game ideas, and we set that as a starting point. So see you next lesson. In this lesson, we will learn some tips and tricks to come up with good game concepts. Okay, so the first step in game design is always an idea. And not only in game design, ideas are the beginning of the creative and development process. You cannot have a game if you don't have an idea. And that might seem hard, but it's even harder to come up with excellent ideas. Originally, an idea might come from anywhere. You may want to start a game by thinking of a setting, which is like if you want to make a sci-fi game, or you want to make a medieval game, or you want to make a steampunk game. That will be your setting and your starting point for your game. It may come from a set of rules. If you want to make a platformer or an RPG, or you want to make a game in which crafting is important, that will be okay. And something that happens a lot in our industry is that you kind of rely on an existing design. For example, a lot of games nowadays they use the Batman Arkham series combat system for their combat systems because they know that it works, and that might be the starting point for something new. You may want to start by technology. If you're making a game for iOS, it will be very different from a game made for an Xbox One or a PS4. You may want to start your game from narrative in terms of I want to tell this story and I want to make sure that this story is told through the game. And sometimes you may want to start by a market analysis. If you find a market niche, you may want to go there and make sure your game is profitable. So you might be thinking, what about innovative games, like 100% original games? I have to tell you something. There are nothing in this industry which is 100% original. All those concepts that you might think that they are really original and innovative, they always came from one of those five categories. Either there is a scale change, there's a role inversion, there's a setting change, there's a game mechanic alteration, or a combination of some or even all of the above. If you think of scale variation, probably the best example would be the Sims compared to SimCity. Both are games created by Maxis and Will Wright, but the difference is that instead of in SimCity you're managing a city, and in The Sims you're managing a family, which is basically the same thing but with a closer camera. If you think about role inversion, you may want to think about Dungeon Keeper, which is a very famous game by Peter Molyneux, in which you're controlling the dungeon master and you have to make sure that no hero gets into the dungeon and succeeds. So that's basically, you're doing the opposite that you do in regular games. If you think about Game Dev Story, which is a pretty good sim, it's just like any other sim, but the main difference is that they added the game development process into that hasn't been done before. So that's why Game Dev Story is such a good game, or is perceived as a really innovative game. And of course, if you take Braid and you think about how time is managed in Braid, and the alteration of time, it's a really key feature for this game, and that's what really makes a successful and innovative game. Our last example would be BioShock. BioShock is a pretty good game, but it's just a combination of a couple elements like System Shock 2, which is BioShock is the spiritual successor of System Shock 2, but it also has the Art Deco style and objectivism, which is the philosophical current by Ayn Rand. When you're coming with concepts, I always like to keep this diagram. Is a diagram that Derek Yu made, is the creator of Spelunky, and he defined that when you're coming with a concept, you should probably think about the games you want to make, the games you're good at making, and the games you want to have made. And once you have that defined, you should probably think of a way to generate ideas. So, as a professional, I've created a couple concepts in my life, game concepts in my life. You can wait for inspiration to come. You have to develop a formal system to generate ideas, and that's generally a brainstorming. Brainstorming, as some of you may know, is just a group of people discussing and argumenting ideas. Generally, in groups of 3, 5, that's the way it works better. And always with a defined objective. Maybe you may have a meeting in which you have to discuss game mechanics, or you have to discuss the look of the main character, but you must keep that really well defined. In a brainstorming session, you have to generate and write down lots of ideas. Nothing is discarded. That will come later. And of course, you should make sure that you make your session short, maximum 1 hour, because after that, ideas might start coming. And in a brainstorming session, someone should be moderating the session and make sure that everyone has his chance to speak and to expose his or her ideas. So after you have defined your game concept and you really have your idea in your mind, how do you communicate that to people outside the team, or to a publisher? Well, we'll see that on next lesson. So see you next lesson. In this lesson, we will take a brief look to game design documentation and the different types of documents used in the game industry. Okay, so once you have defined your game concept or game idea, you need to find a way to communicate that to your audience. It doesn't matter if it is your publisher or your team. You need to find a way to really tell them what your game is about. So the only way to do that is through game design documentation. There are three main types of document. The first is a pitch document or a game concept document. That's a very brief document in which you kind of explain your idea, relying heavily on images. After that, you have the game proposal, which is oriented to business, and it has an approach more direct approach to deadlines or to commercial success of your game, and so on. And after that, you'll have the game design document, which is probably the most used document. And there are different types of documents inside game design, but we'll get into that later. So the pitch document, as I said, is a brief description of the game concept. It has to be visually appealing. Mostly when you're pitching a concept to a publisher, or you're explaining your idea to your team, you will only have like a small amount of time, in terms of like 5 minutes or even less sometimes. So you have to make sure that your idea relies a lot in images, not in words. I mean, you're going to have words, but you're going to have a small amount of words. And generally, this document is oriented to publishers in order to get a budget to fund your game. It's oriented to your team to explain, to give an overview of your project. And even sometimes it's oriented to marketing if you're trying to sell the concept to different audiences. Generally, it's a pitch document. It's done in Microsoft PowerPoint because it's a tool that everyone has. When you're designing, you always pick the most common tool to make sure that if you deliver something to your publisher, they're going to get the chance to take a look at it. And if you're using, you might be using some other complex software, but you're not going to make sure if the publisher has that complex software too. So you have to make sure that everything that you deliver is going to be viewed by your audience. That's why most game designers use PowerPoint to express their ideas. This is what is inside a pitch document. Generally, you explain your concept very briefly. Then you move to the genre of your game. I mean, if it's a platformer, it's an adventure game or whatever. You define the platform you're aiming because, as we were discussing in the previous lesson, it's not the same, not in terms of budget, in terms of production, or in terms of design, to make a game for iOS or make a game for Android that making a game for consoles or PC. You will also have to define a look. That doesn't mean that you have to define to artistically define the look of your game. That will be a task for the art director. But generally, as a starting point, you have to define how your game is going to look. Generally, I mean, if you're making a cartoon, like you can see in the image here, in the left image, it obviously has a cartoon look, and in the right, it has a sci-fi mecha look. So that's something that the starting point for an art director is always given by a game designer. And of course, you have to talk about references. Your game is going to look or is going to compete against other games, and it will be pretty helpful to define what your reference are for this game. A game proposal, as I said, it's a brief explanation of a game concept. It kind of gets a little bit more, but not much into detail. That would be in the game design document. In a game proposal, you kind of make specific statements about references, about competition, about benchmark, and about deadlines too. If you're planning to release your game in 2015, in Q1 or Q2, that's basically what you're trying to do is to sell your concept. That you do that with a pitch document too, but here you try to do it in a slightly more detailed way. And it's generally oriented to business and publishers. And sometimes it is a document that is used to sign an agreement with a publisher. And it's generally, as the same in the pitch document, it's generally written in Microsoft Word. For the same reasons, you want to make sure that your publisher is able to read the document you're giving them. So that's why you use Microsoft Word. And of course, you might want to change it or edit it sometimes, and that's why you don't usually send a PDF document, because you want to make sure that they can easily edit it and change something, like it might be a budget or schedule or whatever. After that, the next step in game design is a game design document, which is basically our #1 tool. Game design documents are useful to describe all the game details to be implemented by different departments. And as in the previous documents, is also done with Microsoft Word. But we'll get into it as in following lessons. In our next lesson, what we are going to do is we're going to create a pitch document. But to do that, we have to define the visual look of our pitch document, because as I said, it's very important to have a well-defined visual look for your pitch. So, see you next lesson. In this lesson, we will explore some basic Photoshop features in order to start defining the visual look for our pitch document. Okay, so now we're here at Photoshop, which is probably the most powerful image editing software. And it's not that you need to be a Photoshop expert to become a game designer, but it will help you a lot to know a little bit of this program, mostly to create level design layouts and to create mockups for your game design documents and pitches. So I just wanted to give you a quick overview of this program. and I'm just going to show you a little bit of how this program works. First of all, here's the tool. On the left is the toolbar, and we have a couple icons. Just clicking on this one this is the move tool. Okay, so I'm going to show you. This is a thing that I've drawn. I'm going to explain you what's on the right side of the screen here in a little bit, but for now, let's just focus on tools. The move tool, which can be selected by pressing the V key, is used basically to move things. I mean, you can move the things that you have drawn. This is the marquee tool, and you can select it by pressing M. And if you click and drag, left click and drag, you will have a selection. And if you press Ctrl C and Ctrl V, you can copy that. Okay, so here's a copy. Here is the lasso tool, which is basically like the same as the marquee tool, but it lets you select. You have different selections with different kind of shapes. This is the magic wand. The magic wand, whose shortcut is W, is used to select pixels, as you can see here, and colors. This is the crop tool, which kind of works like the same as the marquee tool, but the difference is when you select it and you press enter, you're going to crop that image. Okay. And this is the brush tool, which is the way that I created this image here. So basically, you can draw with this tool, and you can select it by pressing V. Here's the shortcut. Sorry, the eraser that you can. You can see if you can press A, you're going to select it, and you can just erase what you want to erase. And there's a couple more, which only may be of importance. Is this one, which is the gradient tool that it will help you to create a gradient from the colors that you define here. And basically, you do it by left clicking and dragging. That's the line, and that's the direction in which you're going to create the gradient. Okay, that's pretty simple stuff. There's a lot of things here, but that's not as important. Probably the only important thing is this tool here, the hand tool, that will help you to move your picture over the canvas. Anyway, I'm just going to show you a little bit of tools here. Just let me erase this. Every time you create a new document, you're going to see this, which is like, let me just see this, just a blank document. So if you want to draw something, you really want to make or draw something or just create something over it, you're going to need to create a new layer. And you can do it just by left clicking in this icon here. This is going to create a new layer. Let me create two layers, and I'm going to put layer 2 below layer 1, and I'm going to go to layer 1. You can just select by left clicking on them, and I'm just going to select the brush tool, or you can press V, and I'm going to draw again the smiley face. And let's imagine that I want to color this thing. So I can go here, which is something also important. This is the color picker, and select any color. Okay, so I'm going to select a purple, for example. That doesn't matter. This purple color. And what happens if I color here? I'm going to be erasing the black line. So I don't want to do this. I'm going to press Ctrl C, set to undo it, and I'm going to go to layer below, and I'm going to paint here. So as you can see, the black is preserved because it's on top of the purple color. So that's how layers work. You can select two layers by keeping press Ctrl and left clicking. Now I have these two layers selected, and if I press Ctrl E, I can merge both layers into just one layer. Okay, so That's pretty simple stuff. That's basically what you need to know. Here are some things that might be useful too. Mostly, this is the transform tool that is used to if we want to scale our drawing, or if we want to rotate it, skew it, whatever. The shortcut for that is Control T. It will be quite easy. And if we keep Shift pressed, we're going to respect the scale of what we are scaling. Okay. Um, there are also some adjustments that you can do to your image. You can change the brightness and contrast of your image, which, of course, with this image, is not there's not much that we can do. And that's there are also some styles and effects. Okay, so for example, if we select the stroke, it will create a line outside the pixels that are filled. So as you can see here, if I change the color of the fill type of the stroke, if I turn to red, it's going to create a red stroke around what we have drawn. Okay, so that's a really quick overlook of Photoshop. As long as you keep using it, you will be better at it. And in the next lesson, what we are going to do is we're going to really explore a little bit of how to really create interesting visuals for our PowerPoint presentation. So, see you next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to create assets for our pitch document. Okay, so let's say that we have finished our brainstorming session and that we have a game concept that we really want to make into a game. And that game concept is a puzzle platformer whose main character is a vampire, and you have to play with all the vampire abilities like turning into fog or turning into a bat. And we're going to make a pitch document to present that to a publisher or to the rest of the team or whatever. So first of all, I've created this drawing of our main character. That doesn't mean that in order to become a game designer, you need to know how to draw. That's not the case at all. If you don't know how to draw and you need a character drawing for reference, you can ask an artist to do that, and or you can, if you don't have any artist available, you can just grab any image in the internet. That will be perfectly okay. Or even a reference image of something that kind of expresses what you're looking for. I mean, if you have in this case, if you're looking for a cartoony vampire, you can look at thousands of examples in Google or wherever. Here's also, just let me put this into the screen. It's a small mocap of one of the mechanics. It will be that transformation. And we have this one here, which is a mocap with a UI here in the screen. Because we're going to make this game for iOS, Android, and tablets. So what we are going to do now is we're going to create a pitch document. First of all, we're going to screen cap our computer screen. Why? Because this way, when you create a new document, here you can go to File, and left-click on New, or press Ctrl-N. It's going to create the document with the size of your screen, which is going to be very helpful when you create the background of your PowerPoint presentation. So we're going to click OK, and now we have this here, which is going to be our canvas. Now we're going to drag this image into the blank document. To do that, we're going to click here, move, and left click and drag it and bring it here. Okay, there's a mismatch and a color profile. That's okay. We'll convert the image. And now we have this because you know that the size of the drawing is pretty big, and it's really good because we're going to use this as a background image. And to do that, we are going to adjust the opacity. So here's the layer that we just dragged here, and we can change the opacity to make sure it blends with the background. Problem is that the background now it's white, which is not exactly a really interesting background for a vampire game. So what we're going to do is we're going to select here, and we're going to select a color that kind of fits the vampire theme, which obviously is a red one. It's a red one, but mostly cold colors like blue, purple, and black and gray. Those will be great to express, and even we can grab something which is slightly darker and reddish. And now we are going to color the background here. To do that, we can either click here in the paint bucket tool. By the way, to select the bucket tool, those tools there are like a couple stacked one over the other. So in order to select what you want, you have only to press left click, and then you can select whatever you want. In this case, here in the same place of the gradient tool, there's the paint bucket tool. So you select the paint bucket tool, and you kind of paint your image here. Okay, so the thing is that that's not bad, but it's not blending at all. So, and by the way, the background is very plain. So what we really want to have is something in the borders just to attract the attention to the center of our presentation, which is going to be where everything is taking place. So we're going to create a new layer here, and now we're going to draw something. It doesn't matter there's different pencils here that you can use, and some pencils here are really interesting because they kind of have, this one here has the like a blood or the blood shape that will be interesting to create some shades here. But anyway, by the way, to do that, to select the type of pencil that you want, you just have to press right button anywhere in the canvas, and this menu will pop up, and here you can select the brush that you want and the size that you want. So we're going to have a really big size, and we're going to be selecting like a darker color, and we're going to be painting something like that. It's not like a big deal. It's going to be a slightly pixelated, that's okay. We'll solve this. And we're going to select this one. Just to give it a look of a slightly look of darkness around. So now what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that it blends, and to do so we're going to blur this layer, because you know we have two layers here. This is the dark layer below, and on top of the color layer, and we're going to blur it by clicking layer. I can click in filter, blur, and Gaussian blur. So now we're going to select it, and now it has the look of something that kind of attracts the attention to the center of the screen. But now it's not blending pretty well, so we're going to tone it down a little bit just to make sure that we have this kind of It's kind of blending better. So now the black color is a slightly sort of a 40% opacity, and it kind of blends better with the background. But anyway, what if we want to give it slightly a better depth to the background? We're just going to, every time you select the color picker here, you can select any color in the screen and it will select it for you. Okay, so we're going to select this color, and this will be your main color, and this here will be your secondary color, which is going to be, for example, dark black. Okay, and we're going to create a new layer, and what we're going to do is we're going to go here and select the gradient tool. And as you can see here, it's going to make a gradient from this red color to this darker color. So if I click here, click and drag, left click and drag to the bottom, it will do this, which is, I'm not sure if kind of fits what we want. I would probably like this, but probably with a slightly brighter to increase its contrast. That way we're going to be to image, adjustments, and we're going to go to brightness, contrasts. And we're going to increase brightness and increase contrast. Okay, so now we have something that kind of is suitable for that. But anyway, this image is not blending at all. So we're going to change the blending mode of our image. We're going to go here we're going to go here to select the layer, and we're going to change it to screen. And as you can see, it doesn't blend good, so we're going to be changing until we find something that kind of helps us to have the image and keep it defined. Now I'm switching. Just if you left click here and you click any of those options, you can switch from one option to another just by pressing the left and the right key. Okay, so we're going to select something that kind of blends, and that really, here is overlay. Okay, the problem with that is that it's too visible. I mean, we want to have something visual in our PowerPoint presentation, but we don't want to have something that kind of attracts the attention, because the important things of our presentation are going to be here. We just want this to give it a solid look. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the move tool. We're going to move this to the right side, and we're going to select around it. It doesn't need to be anything too strict, just something in between. And now we'll turn this into a mask. To do that, press the Q key. Okay, now our selection is turned into a mask. And what we're going to do now is we're going to blur that selection. So go to filter, blur, and instead of blurring the image, Gaussian blur, sorry, as you can see, instead of blurring the image, it's blurring our selection. So now, if you press Q again and you delete by pressing delete that selection, it will be blended better. Anyway, let's just move it slightly down so it kind of blends better. And now we have something, and even slightly more. Okay, now we have our main character here, but it's not going to distract the reader. I mean, it's going to be present, but it's not going to distract anyone that's reading the PowerPoint. So now what we're going to create is something where the text and image is going to be. We can do it here in Photoshop, or we can do it in PowerPoint. That will be totally okay. We'll do that in our next lesson. So see you next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to keep creating assets for our pitch document. Okay, so now we have a pretty decent background for our PowerPoint presentation, but we still need some place to put our text and our images, because this is only the background. So what we're going to do is we're going to go here to this icon, which is the rectangle tool, and we're going to create a rectangle of the size that we want to have our text on. It's going to be on the center of the screen because it's important to have all the information here. As you can see, it has created a reddish rectangle. So we want to change that because we want that to stand out from the background. And we want to have a different color, not blended with the background. So what we're going to do is we're going to double click in our rectangle and we're going to change its color to a grayish color. Okay, so now this is done. But as you can see, our character's face is covered by the rectangle. So we want to make sure that this character is visible. To do that, the easiest way will be by clicking the move icon, and we can move it to the right. But as you can see, when we were erasing, there has been some sort of mistake while erasing it. So we want to make sure that this is not visible. So the easiest way to move a selection or a layer when it's selected will be by pressing the left and right arrows. So you can see here, I'm pressing the right arrow, sorry. So now we have our character's face in the right. And even if we wanted to do it a little more, we can move this to slightly to the left and up, and a little bit more just to give a better look of the character. Now what we want to have is this rectangle to make sure that it kind of give a certain sort of depth from the background. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to layer, layer style, and drop shadow. And as you can see here, it is creating a nice shadow on the back of our rectangle. We can change the distance of this shadow, and we can change the spread and the size. But what we are going to change is the opacity of this to make it a little shadow, not a darker one. So as you can see here, it kind of stands out from the rest of the background. Now we're almost done. The only thing that we need is a font. We need titles for our PowerPoint presentation, and we have to decide which kind of letter we're going to use. So basically, we're going to go here, which is the type tool. We're going to create a new layer, and we're going to write something. Just let me select, because I think this is important. I'm going to select this font, and we're going to write setting, for example. Okay. This font is a really nice font. It kind of gives the Gothic style to the game, but I think it's too serious for a cartoon game. That will be perfect for a Castlevania type of game, but not for our game, which is a comic game. So what we're going to do is we're going to double click here, and we're going to select a different font, which is here. You can, by the way, you can download thousands of free fonts from thousands of websites, and those are free to use, and it's pretty common to do that. Now, this is a really interesting font because it kind of gives the look of It might be scary thing, but it might be cartoony too. So that's I think that's a really good one. But anyway, uh, having a white font and just that, it will be too simple. That's why we're going to just give it a little bit of detail. We're going to give it stroke, something that we did in the previous video. We're going to, as you can see, it creates a stroke around the letters. And we're going to increase it a little bit. And instead of making it black, we're going to make it like a darker red tone. You know, every time you click on a color picker, you can click the color that you want. So now it kind of blends better. And what we were going to give it to is, and it's also in layer style, we're going to give it a gradient overlay only to the letters. So we can go here and just, this one will be okay because black and gray and white are tones that we are using, and that will be perfect for our letters. So the good things here you can see different gradients that you can apply. This will be okay. Just by getting the opacity down, you can get to have this gradient that is slightly different, but it will give it a professional look. So we just click OK, and here's also the other styles that you have used. I mean, if I'm not happy with my stroke, I can go here and make it slightly smaller or whatever. So now we have something that it's really the starting point to our pitch document. So what am I going to do now is we're going to hide this, and I'm going to save this document into a PNG, and I'm going to bring it to PowerPoint. So File and Save, and I'm going to save it as a PNG. And we'll continue on PowerPoint on next lesson.